My sister and her fiancé made fun of me for paying their bills, so I turned them off and now. Growing up, money was always a source of tension in our family. My parents worked tirelessly, yet there was never quite enough to go around. Every expense was weighed carefully, every unnecessary indulgence scrutinized. I learned early on to be cautious with money, to think twice before spending, and to always have something saved for emergencies. But my sister, Sophia, was different. She didn't just ignore our financial struggles, she seemed to resent them. From the moment she could make her own choices, she gravitated toward extravagance. She had an innate ability to make people believe she belonged in luxury, even when her bank account told a different story. She was the type of person who would rather starve for a week than admit she couldn't afford the designer bag she paraded around with. It was a habit that followed her into adulthood, shaping her relationships, her career, and eventually, her entire life. Sophia worked as a personal trainer. It wasn't a bad career, but it certainly didn't support the life she wanted to live. She wanted opulence, status, the kind of lifestyle she saw influencers flaunting online. And she found a partner who was just as deluded, Ben, her fiancé. Ben was a struggling real estate agent. Struggling was an understatement. He had big dreams, smooth talk, and an expensive taste that rivaled Sophia's, but what he didn't have was success. He boasted about million-dollar listings, acting as though he was always on the verge of a massive breakthrough, but the reality was far grimmer. His commission checks were sporadic, his debts were mounting, and his financial strategy seemed to consist of little more than blind optimism. Together, they created a mirage of wealth. They rented a luxury apartment in one of the city's high-rise buildings, floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, concierge service. The kind of place where real millionaires lived. But Sophia and Ben weren't millionaires. They weren't even financially stable. Their apartment alone drained more than half of their combined income, leaving them constantly scrambling to make ends meet. Yet, despite their precarious finances, their spending habits never changed. Sophia had a collection of designer handbags worth more than my annual savings. She refused to be seen in anything that wasn't brand name, as if her worth as a person depended on the labels stitched into her clothing. Ben was no better. He leased a luxury car he couldn't afford, always picking the flashiest model, changing it every year just to maintain the illusion of success. I watched all of this with a mix of frustration and disbelief. While they were out dining at five-star restaurants, I was budgeting my groceries. While they were posting vacation pictures from tropical resorts, I was putting money into my retirement fund. And the worst part? They looked down on people like me, people who lived within their means, people who made responsible choices. To them, financial caution was synonymous with being dull, unambitious. Sophia had perfected the art of making me feel small. She had an uncanny ability to turn financial responsibility into something shameful, something embarrassing. "You're always so cheap," she'd say with an exasperated sigh whenever I refused to split the bill for one of her absurdly overpriced restaurant choices. Or worse, she'd roll her eyes and mutter, "God, I can't imagine living like you. Counting every penny. What's the point of working if you're not going to enjoy life?" Enjoying life, to her, meant spending recklessly and worrying about consequences later. But the consequences were already catching up with her. Their credit card debt was staggering. I knew because, on more than one occasion, she'd come to me, voice laced with false humility, asking for a small loan to help cover this or that. She never framed it as desperation, always as something temporary, a minor inconvenience. "It's just bad timing," she'd say, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "Ben's got a huge deal closing next month, and I just need to float some things until then." The huge deal never materialized. Neither did the money I lent her. She never outright refused to pay me back, she just acted like it wasn't a priority. Like I was a bank with infinite patience, someone who would always be there to absorb the financial mess she refused to acknowledge. It wasn't just the money that infuriated me. It was the arrogance. The way she and Ben carried themselves as if they were above struggling, as if their lifestyle was something they deserved rather than something they were desperately clinging to with maxed-out credit cards and delusions of grandeur. Ben, for all his charm, was even worse when it came to financial reality. He had a habit of embellishing his success, making it seem like he was on the verge of a breakthrough that never came. He'd talk about high-profile clients, massive commissions, as if he were some elite power broker, but I'd seen his reality. He barely made enough to cover their rent some month. It was almost comical, the lengths they went to keep up appearances. Their apartment was filled with expensive furniture, but they couldn't afford basic necessities. Their fridge was often near empty, but their closet was overflowing with luxury brands. They spent thousands on designer shoes, but Sophia would call me in a panic over an overdue utility bill. And yet, no matter how bad things got, Sophia never let her image slip. If she was struggling, no one outside the family would ever know. She kept up her Instagram perfect life, making sure every post exuded wealth and glamour. She had curated her entire existence into something artificial, smoke and mirrors, held together by debt and stubborn denial. I had stopped feeling sorry for her a long time ago. She had made her choices. But what infuriated me the most was the way she acted superior despite it all. As if she had unlocked some secret to life that I was too blind to see. "You're just scared to take risks," she told me once when I called her out on her spending. "You're content being mediocre?" Mediocre. That was the word she used to describe me. Someone who lived responsibly, who didn't spend money I didn't have, who planned for the future instead of pretending I was already living it. But the truth was, Sophia and Ben were the ones living in fear. Fear of being exposed, fear of having to admit they weren't wealthy, fear of acknowledging that they were sinking under the weight of their own recklessness. I knew it was only a matter of time before everything collapsed around them. No one can live on borrowed money forever. No one can outrun reality indefinitely. And when the inevitable happened, when they could no longer keep up the charade, I had no doubt that Sophia would do what she always did, look for someone else to bail her out. And I refused to be that person. Not anymore. Sophia called in January 2023, her voice thick with tears, her words barely forming through panicked gasps. "We're 3 months behind. The rent is going to bounce. We've tried everything, but Ben's deal keeps getting delayed. I don't know what to do. We can't lose the apartment." I sat in silence for a moment, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't surprised, just exhausted. Sophia had always been reckless, but this was different. This wasn't a shopping spree she regretted or a bill she forgot to pay. This was her entire life unraveling. And despite every warning, every argument about her spending, she had still ended up here, desperate and begging for help. And I was still the fool who cared. Against my better judgment, I sent her $2,000 that night. It stung, watching my savings shrink, but what was I supposed to do? Let my sister get evicted? Let her call our parents, who had nothing to give? No. I told myself this was temporary, just a bridge to get her to Ben's big deal, the same imaginary success story she'd been selling me for years. She promised she wouldn't ask again. That promise barely lasted a month. By February, she was calling again. "I just need a little more. The utilities are late, and Ben's deal is taking longer than expected." I hesitated. "Sophia, I can't keep. Please," she cut me off, her voice already breaking, already making me feel like a heartless bastard for even thinking of saying no. "Just this one time. I swear." Another $1,500 left my account. March came, then April. The calls never stopped. Every month, it was something else. "Ben's car payment is due, and he needs it to meet clients. We're behind on credit cards. If they cut us off, we're screwed. We can't keep living like this." No, I couldn't keep living like this. I had started cutting my own expenses to accommodate hers. I stopped eating out. I reduced my retirement contributions. I told myself I could afford it, that I had room in my budget. But the truth was, every time I sent her money, I felt sick. Because I knew. I knew she wasn't just paying bills. She and Ben were still eating at nice restaurants. Still posting pictures from weekend getaways. Still buying expensive clothes and pretending nothing was wrong. And I was paying for it. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was the way she treated me, like I owed her. She never said thank you. Never acknowledged that I was making sacrifices. If anything, she acted annoyed when I hesitated. I wouldn't ask if I had another choice, she'd snap, like I was the one being difficult. As if she hadn't chosen this life. As if she hadn't ignored every warning, every reality check, until she had no other option but to beg. And still, I kept sending the money. Because every time I wanted to stop, I imagined her crying, her voice cracking, her world falling apart. And I couldn't be the one to let it happen. Not yet. I don't know why I checked Sophia's Instagram that night. Maybe I wanted to reassure myself that she was really struggling, that the money I kept sending her was going toward rent, bills, and survival, not luxuries. Maybe I just needed to see some proof that I wasn't being played like an idiot. But what I saw made my stomach turn. Sophia and Ben were at a rooftop restaurant, wine glasses in hand, the city skyline glowing behind them. The caption read, "Much-needed date night. Work hard, play harder. #blessed." I stared at my screen, my thumb hovering over the photo, rage bubbling up in my chest. Work hard? Play harder? Was this some kind of joke? I had skipped buying a new PC. The one I had barely ran anymore. I had stopped getting my usual coffee from the cafe near work because every extra dollar mattered. I had cut back on everything while they were out drinking expensive wine, pretending they were living the high life. I scrolled down. A week earlier, another post. A weekend getaway at a lakeside resort. Relaxing escape. We all deserve to unwind. 2 weeks before that, new designer bags. Treat yourself. You only live once. I felt sick. They weren't struggling. They weren't fighting to keep their heads above water. They were living exactly as they always had. Except now, they had me financing their delusion. 18 months. I had sent them $36,000. I did the math in my head, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. That was a down payment on a house. That was 2 years' worth of student loan payments. That was my entire emergency fund drained away, piece by piece, while they laughed over overpriced cocktails. And the worst part? They were still asking for more. Sophia had texted me earlier that day, casual as ever. Hey, can you send $2,000? Bills are stacking up. Ben's deal is almost through, just a little longer. A little longer. She had been saying that since January 2023. I closed Instagram and threw my phone onto the table. My hands were shaking. I had sacrificed so much for them. Given up things I wanted, things I needed. I had told myself I was helping family, doing the right thing. But they weren't suffering. I was. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized Sophia had never really cared. Not about me. Not about the money I had bled for them. She just cared that I kept saying yes. The breaking point came in the form of a phone call from Aunt Linda. I wasn't expecting it. She never called me unless it was about some family gathering or holiday plans. But that night, her voice was quieter, more careful, as if she wasn't sure whether to tell me what she had just overheard. I thought you should know, she said, hesitating. I was at your mom's house last weekend, and Sophia and Ben were there. They didn't know I was in the next room when they started talking about you. I shifted in my chair, already bracing myself. They were laughing about how you keep sending them money, she continued. Ben called you their personal ATM, and Sophia said you were a rich tech nerd who was too guilty to say no. They joked that as long as they kept the act up, you'd keep paying for their life. The words hit harder than I expected. For a second, I couldn't even respond. I felt something inside me crack. Not just anger, but something deeper, something worse. Humiliation. 18 months. 18 months of sacrificing my own comfort, of skipping things I needed, of watching my savings bleed out little by little, because I thought I was helping. Because I thought they needed me. And the whole time, they had been laughing. I forced a breath. Are you sure? I wouldn't have called if I wasn't. I wanted to believe she was mistaken. That maybe Sophia had said something in frustration, something out of context. But I knew better. It all made sense now, the way she never said thank you, the way she always acted annoyed when I hesitated, the way she dismissed my struggles like they didn't matter. I had thought I was her lifeline. But to her I was just convenient. And suddenly, every time she had begged, every time she had cried over the phone, felt fake. I had been nothing more than a joke to them. I clenched my jaw, my fingers curling into fists. I had been too blind, too stupid to see it before. But that ended now. I sat at my desk, my hands gripping the mouse, so tightly my knuckles turned white. The humiliation burned deep, heavier than the anger. 18 months of my life, $36,000 drained from my bank account, all for what? To be laughed at behind my back? To be called a rich tech nerd and their personal ATM? I couldn't let it slide. I wasn't just going to stop sending them money. I was going to make them feel the weight of their lies, the full scope of their hypocrisy. So I did what I did best. I started gathering data. It wasn't hard. Every payment I had sent them was neatly stored in my bank statements, my Venmo history, and old text messages. I went back to January 2023 and began tracking every single dollar I had given them. Rent payments, emergency utility bills, car payments for Ben's luxury lease. It was all there, documented down to the last cent. But that was only half the picture. The real evidence was on their Instagram. Scrolling through Sophia's posts felt like peeling back layers of my own stupidity. Every time she had begged me for money, she had turned around and flaunted her lifestyle like nothing was wrong. March 15th, She had texted me that morning, saying their water was going to be shut off if I didn't send $1,200 immediately. That same evening, she posted a picture at an upscale rooftop bar, a bright pink cocktail in her hand, captioned, "Self-care night. Treat yourself. You deserve it." May 2nd, she had cried over the phone, saying they were out of groceries, that they couldn't even afford basics like milk and bread. 2 days later, she posted a mirror selfie in a brand new designer dress. The price tag was still visible in the corner. July 20th. Ben had personally called me, saying he couldn't meet a client because he didn't have enough for gas, that they were at rock bottom. 3 days later, they were at a luxury spa, getting massages and drinking champagne. I recorded everything. Screenshot. Instagram stories. Comments where her friends hyped up her lavish lifestyle. I even went the extra step, recording the Instagram stories as video files so she couldn't delete them later and claim I was lying. Then I compiled everything into a spreadsheet. Column 1. The date of every payment I sent. Column 2. The exact reason she gave for needing the money. Column 3. Screenshots of her Instagram posts within 48 hours of each request. By the time I was done, the timeline was damning. $36,000 gone, and almost every request had been followed by some kind of luxury expense. I stared at the completed spreadsheet, the weight of it settling into my chest. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal. She hadn't needed me. She had used me. And now I was going to make her face it. My phone buzzed. Sophia, Venmo request, $2,000. Her message came seconds later. Please send ASAP. We're in a really bad spot. Ben's deal is just a couple of weeks away. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent. I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the phone. Then, instead of sending money, I sent her a screenshot. It was from 3 days ago. Her and Ben at a high-end steakhouse, their plates full of filet mignon, a $200 bottle of wine between them. Her caption had read, "You can't put a price on good food and good company. # living our best life." I stared at the screen, watching the typing indicator appear, then disappear. For the first time in 18 months, Sophia had nothing to say. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not after everything. After Sophia went silent on my last message, the one where I sent her a screenshot of her luxury dinner just days after begging me for money, I knew it was time to end this for good. No more quiet resentment. No more pretending I didn't know. I wanted her to feel the weight of her deception publicly. So I called a family meeting. I phrased it carefully, making it seem like it was just a financial discussion about some concerns I had regarding Sophia and Ben's situation. That way, no one would tip them off. I needed them to walk into that room confident, still believing they could spin more lies if necessary. They had no idea what was coming. The meeting was held at my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon. Nearly everyone was there: our parents, Aunt Linda, a few cousins. Even Max showed up, though he usually avoided family drama like the plague. I set up my laptop, connected it to the TV, and pulled up the PowerPoint I had spent the last 2 days perfecting. The moment Sophia and Ben walked in, Sophia sighed dramatically. "Is this really necessary?" she muttered, plopping down on the couch. Ben, ever the overconfident idiot, just smirked. "If this is another lecture about money, let's just skip it," he said. "I don't know why you're so obsessed with our finances." I didn't even acknowledge them. I just clicked to the first slide. Slide 1. Where $36,000 went. Dead silence. I turned to the room. For the past 18 months, I've been helping Sophia and Ben financially because they claimed they were struggling. They told me they couldn't afford rent, food, or basic necessities. I gave them money every single month, sacrificing things for myself, because I believed they had no choice. But I've gathered proof that they weren't struggling. They were lying. I clicked to the next slide. It showed a neatly formatted spreadsheet, listing every single payment I had sent, right next to timestamps of Sophia's Instagram posts. On the left, the Venmo and bank transfer confirmations: $2,000 for rent, $1,500 for utilities, $1,800 for groceries. On the right, the evidence of their fraud: luxury steak dinner 2 days after requesting rent money, weekend spa getaway 3 days after claiming they couldn't afford food, new designer handbag less than a week after saying their credit cards were maxed out. Gasps filled the room. My mother put a hand over her mouth. My father's jaw tightened. Aunt Linda shook her head in disgust. Sophia's face drained of color. I don't know what this is supposed to prove," she stammered. "Those are old posts." I clicked to the next slide before she could finish. Slide 3, video evidence. I had screen recorded her Instagram stories, ensuring she couldn't delete them and claim they never existed. The videos played in real time, showing her gushing over her self-care day at a wellness spa, her surprise shopping spree, and the 5-star weekend retreat she just had to book for mental health. Every single one of them had been posted within days of her begging me for money. Ben shifted uncomfortably. His usual cocky expression faltered. I clicked again. Slide 4, Ben's career, a closer look. "Now let's talk about Ben's real estate career," I said, my voice ice cold. I had looked him up. In the past 6 months, he hadn't closed a single deal. Not one. His listings were all expired or inactive. I had even called a few agencies he had claimed to work with. None of them had heard of him. "Ben has been unemployed for months," I said bluntly. But they still insisted they needed money because his deal was coming soon. Except there was never a deal. There was never any income coming in at all. Ben's face turned red. "You had no right to." "No right?" I snapped. "You had no right to take my money while mocking me behind my back. You had no right to pretend you were working hard when you were living off my paycheck. You had no right to scam your own family." I clicked to the final slide. Slide 5, the consequences. "Since you two have been living off lies, it's time for reality to catch up." I had already reported Ben's fraudulent activities to his real estate licensing board. The process had started to revoke his license. Without it, he wouldn't even have the option of pretending to work anymore. As for their luxury apartment, I had checked the records. It was already in pre-eviction status. Their landlord had filed paperwork for non-payment. Within a few weeks, they'd be out on the street. The luxury car Ben loved so much? Repossessed. I had seen the notice on their credit report, something Sophia had conveniently forgotten to mention during her money request. "You spent months pretending you had everything under control. Now you're going to face the consequences of your own actions. No more handouts. No more bailouts. No more money. You're on your own." The room was silent. Sophia sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, like she couldn't process what was happening. Ben looked at her like he expected her to fix it. This isn't fair," Sophia finally blurted out. "You didn't have to go this far." I let out a bitter laugh. "You went this far the moment you decided to lie to me. The moment you laughed about me behind my back. The moment you used my kindness against me. You did this to yourselves?" Ben rubbed his face, muttering something under his breath. He looked completely defeated. Sophia's breathing was shaky, her eyes darting around the room, searching for sympathy. But she found none. Our parents were livid. Aunt Linda wouldn't even look at her. Max, who had been quiet the entire time, finally spoke. "You had all that money," he said, shaking his head, "and instead of fixing your life, you just kept pretending? You chose to go broke?" Sophia's lips trembled. "I didn't think." "No," I cut her off. "You didn't think. And now you get to deal with it." In the weeks that followed, everything collapsed for them. Ben lost his real estate license. Without it, he couldn't find another job in the industry. The car was gone within days, towed right from their parking spot. Their eviction notice was finalized. Sophia called me one last time, trying one final plea for help. I didn't even answer. She had to take a real job, a receptionist at a dental office. The same woman who had once mocked me for counting every penny now had to scrape by on an hourly wage. Then, he was stuck bouncing between low-paying temp jobs, his grand illusions of wealth shattered. The glamorous life they had built on lies crumbled around them. And for the first time in 18 months I felt no guilt, because I had given them everything, and in return, they had given me nothing but betrayal.